In the last part of this project, which was last week's video, I built the horizontal section for the shoe storage and the bench and the vertical section for the laundry storage. And this week what I want to do is finish this out and build a French cleat that will hold some hooks for coats and backpacks and that sort of thing. So I'm going to start by building the French cleat, which will be a piece of oak running from the upper section of the laundry storage across the wall above the bench. So I cut it to rough length and I jointed it on one face and one edge, and then I planed the other face. I cut the angle for the French cleat into the side that I didn't joint. Once I had done that, I could cut it to its final width. It's easier to figure the width out when the blade is vertical. I was starting to think about how this was going to get attached to the wall, and I had thought I would just screw it through the face into the wall, but I was thinking about it and there's no other place where you really see the fasteners in this project. So I remembered that I had some of the Z-clip left over from the Jelly Studio project. So I thought maybe I could use that. So I had two little pieces in the shop that I could test the width that I would need for the Z-clip. And it turned out I had just enough room and just enough depth in the piece of wood. So what I was going to have to do was cut a wide dado in the back of the wooden section of the French cleat so that the wood would sit flat against the wall and the aluminum Z-clip would be hidden. So I cut a wide dado, slowly making multiple passes. And with the end of each pass, I had to stop short of the end so that the dado wouldn't come out on that end. Let the saw slow down and stop before I moved the piece of wood. The bottom of my dado wasn't coming out very even, so what I ended up having to do is put a feather board on the fence to hold the piece of wood down to the table saw. And this worked really well. And then a little sanding, and then a little finish. It's just polyurethane. Then to put the cleat up. So the first thing to do was to measure it for final length. So I marked that. Then the same with the Z-clip, and I found where the studs were. And I cut the cleat to the right length, and the little extra bit ended up being really useful, which we'll see in a minute. And I cut the Z-clip to length. I drilled holes in the Z-clip where the studs were in the wall. They're the standard 16 inches apart. And I countersank those holes just a little bit. I cut some strips of wood that would be just the right length to hold the Z-clip up at the height it would need to be at. And I figured that out by mounting a little piece of Z-clip in the little scrap piece of French cleat so that I could figure out exactly how high to mount the clip to the wall. Once things were all set up, it was easy. It was just a matter of putting the screws in. I wanted to use a series of little short pieces of Z-clip on the back side of the French cleat so that I wouldn't have to try and line up two 8-foot lengths of Z-clip all at once. So I did a bunch of little short pieces on the back of the French cleat. And I marked where those would go on the piece of wood. And then they needed to go roughly in that spot. They didn't need to line up exactly. So I just put those in. And then the cleat should just fall into place, which it does. And it just hangs there without any screws on the face, which is nice. Then the thing to make are the hooks that are going to hang off that French cleat. So I had seen, I think it was at the dentist, but I'm not sure. I saw it somewhere, these coat hooks that were sort of a half circle on a peg. And they didn't really look that great, but I like the idea that it wasn't a pointy thing that kind of pokes into your jacket. It's more of a round, big curve that holds your coat in sort of a nicer way. And my first thought was that I could make those on the lathe. So I made little four-sided segmented squares to then turn into the coat hooks. So I glued those together. I just did them all at once. Now for two of them I used the band clamps, which were a little bit on the big side. So I got three of the corners attached, and then one side is just the band, but it was fine. Then for two of them, I used sort of opposing clamps on the two sides, and that seemed to work. That seemed to work as well. Then I needed to make the pegs that these are going to sit on. which was basically making a dowel. So I put a piece of oak on the lathe. I turned a circle on one end that would fit into the jaws of the chuck a little bit better. And then got to work on the rest of the dowel. I made a little guide piece with the same drill bit that will be used to drill the holes for the pegs that I'm making. And I can use this to test my size, to sneak up on the right diameter that I need. And then once it's down to the right size, I should be able to slip it all the way along the length. It fits snug the whole way along. Then I cut that piece into 2-inch segments to be the pegs for the coat hangers. Then I can drill the holes for the pegs and then glue the pegs in. Now when I clamp this, I didn't clamp with a whole lot of pressure. It's just sort of there, just enough to keep the peg in place. And they're dry. And then I can draw a circle around the center and cut off the excess wood. And then you can see how it goes in the lathe. Now there's a little bit of a method or a process in doing this. I would round up the circle and then clean up the face and do a little sharpening. And then take the chuck off and put bigger jaws on and turn the piece around and do the back. I took quite a bit off the back. I like the idea that the bigger round piece would kind of come up to meet the peg so that they'd be turned together in a way so that where the seam is for the two pieces isn't necessarily where the form breaks. So this meant carving away quite a bit of the back. I can use my little test piece to test again. And it still fits. And then I can turn the piece around again and work on the face. I thought about doing a concave face, but that seemed like a wheel to me in a way. So I did sort of a convex face, which makes it more like a button or a mushroom, I guess. And there we have it. So I made 4 of those. Next, what I needed to make was the vertical flat piece. That would be the second half of the French cleat and the piece that the coat hook and the backpack hook would mount to. So I cut strips out of the oak, and I could cut the 45-degree angle for the French cleat in one end, and then cut that angle off, and then that becomes the second half to the French cleat, which will get attached to the longer vertical section. It was a matter of gluing these together and some tiny pin nails just to hold the glue in place while it dried. Then I thought it would be nice to taper these just slightly. So I got my tapering jig out and very carefully cut a taper. I really don't like how close I got to the blade here, but it was okay. I did some sanding. And I thought it'd be nice to round over the bottom of the vertical section. So I did that on the disc sander as well. And next what I wanted to make were the little hooks that would go at the bottom of this piece. That would be for backpacks or hats or bags or that sort of thing. So I made another dowel, and I could use my same test piece again to test that. I made 4 hooks out of this piece. I cut notches so that I would know where to cut this apart. I pulled it off and took it over to the bandsaw and cut the 4 pieces out of it. And from there I could put each piece back on the lathe and make the little knob at the end of the hook. I tried doing it without the tailstock and it kind of came out. So I put the tailstock back on again and then very carefully worked the end without the tailstock, and it worked. Then I needed to drill the holes for the pegs. You can see the vertical section that I've been working on, and then the pegs get glued into those holes. Just a loose clamping to sort of keep the pegs in place. Once that's dry, I can put some finish on. And it's just the same polyurethane again. And then let that dry. And then the coats can go up and the backpacks can go up. Worked pretty well. You can still sit on the bench between the backpacks and coats. We need to get some kind of shade for the windows, but I really like how the sun comes across the coats. Thanks for watching.